I read the book about 13 years ago, and it was definitely a point in my life when I was trying to uncover some mystery in my own family background. I was aware that my mother was biracial, but she wasn't entirely, just couldn't really talk about it in a sort of straightforward way because she didn't have the information. And when somebody handed me this book, it was sort of like a sort of detective piece of the puzzle. It suddenly made sense to me why she couldn't talk about it. In the 13 years it's taken me from reading the book to this moment where it's about to be in theatres today, has also sort of paralleled my own full understanding of that. And I now do know that, you know, my African-American grandfather passed white for most of his life, and you know, I know a lot more about my family as a result. I think it's a remarkable book because it's a little bit of a smokescreen, the idea that it's exclusively about racial identity. She uses it as a metaphor, and then it becomes honestly about the way that any of us negotiate how much freedom we have to be the sort of person that we think we ought to be versus the person that we want to be, which can sometimes be at odds.
This is my husband, John Bellew. Does he know?
You dislike Negroes, Mr. Bellew?
No, not at all. I hate them.
The puzzle for all of us on the filmmaking side was always, how do we access Irene's interiority? And even beyond that, if we do access it, how do we signal to the audience that essentially she's having a breakdown that she's not even aware of? Obviously there were visual motifs, but sound became really a very huge piece of that puzzle.
Sound can be difficult to communicate about. Oftentimes, whether it's a first-time director or a 10th-time director, there's still a challenge at how you can go to a place like conveying feelings and conveying emotions and conveying thoughts.
We'd always play with this idea of what sound in this world is hitting Irene the strongest at any given moment. It's a scene that's sort of towards the kind of final sequence of the movie, and was very important to force the audience into Irene's perspective as much as possible, her unstable perspective. And I became so fascinated with how sound could do this that I very intentionally decided to play the beginning of the scene on her teapot. So you're very aware of how she is receiving sound and and that's in contrast with this visual of her tightly holding this teapot, because you sort of see in that body language someone trying to keep it together. But in the soundscape, you're also receiving the kind of chatter of this party, how she is, like she's not really connecting to it, she's drifting through it. And she can't stop focusing on this one voice at the end of the room.
I have been trying to get her alone all afternoon.
Claire?
You look too divine, sitting so quiet like a painting. Will you come to ours for a little gathering next month?
Felice, I was telling Dave I just finished his book.
You've read his book?
Well, of course I have. I've read all of them.
And I think that really tells that story of someone right on the edge of a breakdown. And I think, you know, it's always struck me as the most eloquent way of telling that story, because if you'd gone into actually shooting a conventional tea party in a conventional way, I think it would be very difficult to capture that mounting unease.
Rebecca had such a strong vision of this film in her mind, but I love the idea of creating a reality using very specific tools that can kind of remain hidden, you know, in plain sight. I chose to try out these subtones that would just make people feel uneasy, quite simply just so they could be underneath a scene, slowly rise and give that feeling of that tenseness, that uneasiness, but also, which was quite important for me, is not knowing why they feel that way, which is what's happening on the screen.
It is Irene's version of New York. It's not everybody's. You know, we don't get to see the big city unless you're a privileged few sitting on top of a skyscraper. Most people experience New York as their patch of sidewalk and their tiny apartment. But I did want to feel that she's on the peripheries of the jazz age, and the only way that you could really achieve that is with sound. You know, the sound fills in the blanks in your imagination, so you're sort of thinking about all of that stuff that's already in our bones, that we already are aware of, you know. All of these peripheral sounds really give that landscape. This is essentially a very quiet movie, and it's very deliberately silent. And that was always an imperative of mine, because I think space allows an audience to think. But what Dolby Atmos did for us, sort of counterintuitively, is it made that silence really atmospheric. You know, it sort of charges it with an atmosphere that is particular to the movie. And also every sound, every car horn, every bird tweet is very specifically placed and thought about. Jacob and I would every single one, do we want that one, do we not want that? Do we want this one under this line? And with Dolby Atmos, it just has a richness to it and a situational placement that counterintuitively, these very quiet sound effects become very thematically rich, which was just so thrilling to get to do, to have that luxury of instilling quiet sounds with all of the just benefits of this technology.